Right, greetings, hello, welcome. So welcome to the Philosophy Club here in little Bettet in the middle of France, in La Creuse. It's been a wonderful week, as in lots of sunshine and warm weather. Unexpectedly, because it's been the Druid New Year, Samhain. Normally that's really cold and wet in Wales and Scotland. But here in France it's glorious. It's been like a Scottish summer. So we had a little bit of cool, and in the evenings it gets cool. But so touch wood, we're holding on to summer still, and that's pleasant. And it was an interesting, in France we celebrate Toussaint, All Saints' Day, on the 31st of October. And it's a magical day dedicated to all the saints who've ever lived. So I've been reading from my book, The Golden Legend, by the former Archbishop of Genoa, about medieval perspectives on all these different saints. It's a very interesting kind of book of saints. Mine is an updated version because it includes all the other faiths as well, not just Christians, and also not just saints approved by the church. I have Gnostics and Protestants and thinkers and so on in it. But because I believe, as you know, that it's time for philosophers to be a bit more universal than we were 500, 600, 700, 800 years ago. But there's a lot of wisdom in medieval thinking as well. So people like Etienne Gilson, the great French Catholic philosopher, they tried to update Catholic thinking into the modern era, and that is something I'm also hoping to do and trying to do. Perhaps my most important work so far is this book, Being and Knowledge. If any philosophers are out there want to really understand what is this Thomas Stafford going on about, you should study and read this, which is my kind of homage to being and time and being and nothingness. It's a marriage of existentialism and epistemology. It's a study of knowledge and the human-centeredness of knowledge and why, and it's a very interfaith approach. I look at knowledge through the lenses of Buddhism and Christianity and Islam and so on. There's huge sections and chapters on being, knowledge and science, because obviously science just means knowledge. So what is science and the sciences, and I talk about the sciences are all premised on the cutting up of being into separate parts. We have a science of zoology or astronomy or chemistry or physics. Actually it's all one thing they're studying, being itself. So how can we put all these separate knowledges back together into a unity is the puzzle I ask in part 4 of my book, which is on being, knowledge and the sciences. I talk about the Babel problem, which is the Tower of Babel, that knowledge becomes so rarefied and sophisticated scientifically that only specialists working in their tiny little field can understand each other. They have a specialized language to describe all the parts of the body, or the parts of geography, or the parts of chemistry, or so on, or engineering. So this is what's called the Babel problem, which is that as we become cleverer as humans, we're less able to communicate what we know to other people, other colleagues, and this is just a fact. So what we've said we'll do now is use AI, because nobody can master all of knowledge. We can get robots to go out and cruise the web and bring back stuff, but that's not knowledge. That's just hoovering up data which is available and then packaging it so we can read it in meaningful bits. That's not actually generating any new knowledge. So we have a problem. And I address that in this section of the book. And my argument is that as well as specialist scientists, we need generalists who are concerned specifically with the overview and the integration of knowledge into wholeness, back into wholeness, because we've gone so far down the route of splitting everything into its pieces that we're left with a broken planet, with nobody listening to each other, nobody able to understand each other's languages anymore. and everyone is a specialist in something that only they know about, you know. And then it depends on how good you are at convincing everyone that actually you're talking the truth. And that's nowhere more true than in economics. Think of someone like Milton Friedman, who managed to persuade the world that absolute free markets, destruction of the state, smashing away all social security, is the way to create a good society. He was just so fanatical, he persuaded loads of people, and it was an absolute disaster. As you know from reading The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. That's an example of what happens when fanatics seize one part of knowledge and run with it to the exclusion of all else. He knew nothing about metaphysics or ethics or spirituality or religion. He just had his own little specialism and turned it into a super weapon. And that's what people are doing all over the planet, it seems to me. So I address these problems, and I talk about, you know, I look at the problem from an ontological perspective, because this is a crisis of, I mean, other people talk about, you know, the crisis of global warming or the crisis of nuclear weapons or so on and so on. I'm looking at it from a philosophical perspective. And I'm saying we have to come back to the heart-centered unitive knowledge, which I then address in subsequent volumes. And what I've been working on this last week is trying to get the subsequent volumes in a position to be able to be published. And I've used a very sophisticated bit of software to turn audio tapes into text. And it's going to be 9 volumes in addition. Well, the whole thing will be in 9 or 10 volumes, each of which is 300 pages. So this is like an epic work. This is my summer Theologica, and it's my gift to the planet, really. You know, when I'm dead and gone, I hope people will be studying this for years to come. It's taken me a long time to finish it. All I can do in these little philosophy clubs is give little snippets of it. If you want the detail, you've got to read the stuff, right? Or you can listen to it as an audio thing if you prefer to do it that way. So anyway, happy Druid New Year. And there's been, you know, lots going on in the world. We're coming up to the election. It's like Halloween. It's like the Joker. The poor old American psyche does horror shows to itself. It's got this guy called Trump who like wears orange hair and talks nonsense and terrorizes people like the Joker does in the Batman films or something. And only America could do this to itself. Like, why the guy isn't in prison is absolutely beyond comprehension. He's committed crimes. He's been judged a felon, and yet America, I don't know what is the matter with that country. Why don't they have a properly functioning legal system? One of the reasons is because of the this strange constitutional arrangement whereby the Supreme Court is a power unto itself, and the president can appoint people to that, and therefore by immunity. This is what's happened, and this is a constitutional problem that needs fixing. That's just one constitutional problem needing fixing. The other is the whole idea of the College of Electors, which seems to be unfair. It should be the person that wins the outright number of votes gets to be president, in my humble opinion. I think in France it's like that. In any civilized country, you know, you don't have a system whereby you can gerrymander it. And I've read that the reason we have the Electoral College in the States is because when it was set up, they were afraid of the anti-slave states having a majority in Congress and being able to control the presidency. And so they made it that even tiny little states would have the same number of votes when it came to the presidential elections in the Electoral College, so that the slave states could defend their right to have slaves. Okay, so hang on, it's an anachronism, in fact, and it ought to be got rid of, in my humble opinion. But anyway, just as a mere political scientist, it's one of my interests, one of the specialist bits of knowledge I've gone into in detail. I think it's fascinating to watch this election. I sincerely hope Kamala Harris and Tim Walz win. I believe they will. The signs are good. And then I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief if that's the case. I noted that the European Green parties have asked Jill Stein, who's the Green Party candidate designate, who seems quite an intelligent woman, quite an activist and intellectually, quite sharp. They've asked her to step down because she might drain away some of the progressive vote from Kamala Harris, and then Trump will sneak in. I think that's sensible. And since I used to be, well, I still am, involved with the Green movement. I'm not an activist in the Green Party. I used to be a member years ago when it was first set up, back in the 70s even. It's called the Ecology Party in the UK. But it's never had a chance of really breakthrough in the UK, and it's important that in America, I think Jill Stein steps down and lets Kamala Harris win. I mean, her argument has been, no, they're both as bad as each other. I'm the only moral candidate. Both of them are supporting Gaza, the destruction of Gaza. Vote for me because both of the others are evil. I see her argument, but I don't agree with it because they're not equally evil, Kamala Harris and Trump. You can't make that. That's a falsification of the facts. I mean, Kamala Harris is an intelligent, highly educated, moral person who has worked at senior levels and would make a very good president. She can be educated on other matters. She is willing to listen, she said, as part of her stand. Vote for me, I will listen to you. Well, vote for her, she will listen. And if Jill Stein thinks she knows a much better way of solving the Gaza problem, call her up, tell her, persuade her, ask her to appoint new Minister of Peace. Use creative imagination. Kamala Harris might actually appoint people as a Minister of Peace. Trump is just a fanatical, a person without the intellectual capacity for solving problems. He, apart from just throwing brute force at it. I mean, he can bomb people. And he said as much. He will give Israel a green light to just go and bomb whoever it wants. That's dangerous. And so Jill Stein, please work this out. You're a clever woman, and suggest that you pay advice to the Greens of Europe here. So that's one thing that's going on. It's going to be very interesting. It's coming up on the 5th, actually, 5th of November, which is the anniversary of our November the 5th Gunpowder Day, Guy Fawkes Day. In Britain, we celebrate the non-explosion of Parliament. It was back in, I think, 1615 when some extremists tried to blow up the whole of Parliament. I mean, Trump's attack on the Capitol was nothing. These guys were going to blow up the whole of Parliament. When it was sitting, they would have killed every MP and every Lord. And they were Catholic extremists who were annoyed at the Protestant king, James VI. Although he was a wise king and Francis Bacon was his friend, and poor James was trying to keep peace between the Catholics and Protestants of Europe. He married off one child to his daughter married let me get this right, yeah, his daughter married into the French royal family, and his daughter married into the Holy Roman Empire, the Protestants, and he wanted to marry his son off to a Catholic queen. So he thought, because in his view, Christianity shouldn't be about fighting and who's better, Protestants or Catholics. It should be we're all together, and work it out. That's why I call myself a Protestant Catholic. I think it's best to be, sometimes we should protest, but sometimes we should be universal, which is what Catholic means. And we should have this debate at a higher level of disagreement than stabbing each other with swords. Anyway, poor old Jay, that was his position. But there were some Catholic extremists in Britain at the time who weren't happy with that and decided to blow up the whole of Parliament. And they compiled gunpowder and stuck it in the crypt under Parliament. And they were found just in time. It's quite a thrilling story. My friend Ronald Hutton, professor of history at Bristol University, reckons that it was all a plot by British intelligence. to let them get that far. They knew, and then they wanted to get more of them involved, and so, you know, they could smash the whole Catholic conspiracy thing. I don't know, I suspend judgment. I mean, I don't agree with dark intelligence secrets. I'm with Shakespeare, who was a kind of Catholic Protestant himself, and I think we should be together crafting a world of beauty and peace, and then we do wisdom instead of intelligence. But anyway, November the 5th is important to celebrate democracy, really, because blowing people up you don't agree with is not the way to proceed, and it's not true Catholicism. It's not showing a genuine universal spirit, which is what Catholicism means. Anyway, it was thwarted in time. The conspirators were found, tracked back to their lair, a house in Warwickshire, close to where I used to live. And Guy Fawkes, the chief conspirator who was there in the cellars with the gunpowder and just about to light them, was arrested just in the nick of time. So when I was a child, we would have this bonfire every November the 5th and put on it a little stuffed figure to represent Guy Fawkes. It's called Guy Fawkes Night. And we would burn the guy, it's called. I believe they're still doing that in the British Isles. And Lewes, near where I lived in Brighton, was the epicenter of all this. And people used to march through the streets with torches, you know. So, but it's a grim reminder that democracy sometimes needs defending. And that's why I think it's quite auspicious the American election is going to be on November the 5th. Let's hope, you know, enough intelligent people do the right thing. One of my favourite actors, Harrison Ford, the great Star Wars guy, we all love him. He's just issued an appeal to vote for Kamala Harris, saying he's going to do that and saying it's dangerous. Apparently a load of former people that worked for Trump's White House, like generals and senior governors and really important people, have all come out and said, don't vote for him, he's dangerous. So I think, you know, the collective instinct is sensible here, that one shouldn't actually let that guy anywhere near power again. Okay, what else? So the other thing I want to say, coming up on Thursday, is the 7th of November, is the anniversary of Plato's death, the philosopher. He died in 347 BC, and we will be celebrating that here in the you know, the Institute's headquarters, and wherever you are, do spare a thought for Plato. We've never found his body, very odd. With other sages, we know where they're buried, like Kant and people. It's thought Plato's probably in the grounds of the Academy somewhere, but they've never actually found the grave. You know, but they have found the grounds of the Academy, and I've actually been there. I don't think Plato minds not being found. I think it's more important as the ideas live on and his moral witness. I've been reading Iris Murdoch's book, Metaphysics as a Foundation of Ethics, and it's a really dense study, and a lot of it's about Plato. She writes extremely well. Unfortunately, she was tainted by the Wittgensteinian plague that affected British intellectuals in the 1950s and 60s, and everybody was reading Wittgenstein. I've always found Wittgenstein a disappointing author, ever since studying him at University of Bristol philosophy department, when he was like de rigueur, everyone was talking about him. You know, when you read him, it's like, if it's a banquet, it's like being given 2 broken crackers to eat with a bit of Marmite on them. There's nothing of substance in Wittgenstein. All he is a deconstructivist. He destroys other people's ideas, specifically metaphysics. He was a single-minded, you know, thinker. Well, if I can use the word thinker, who simply wanted to destroy all possible metaphysics. And of course, Plato, as the king of metaphysics, was his arch enemy. It left me with a bitter feeling, and I resigned from the philosophy department, which was focused on Wittgenstein, because it was like I'd gone for nourishment and all I got was broken biscuits. So I studied independently. Then I've come across more recently a book by a man called Cornish, an Australian philosopher, who reveals that Wittgenstein almost certainly was a member of the Russian intelligence services, the KGB. He was recruited to them, and he was at the centre of the Cambridge spy ring. There were some very leading British intellectuals who all became communists, and he was one of their leaders, apparently. Now, I suspend judgment. This has never been publicly agreed. Philosophers don't talk about this in polite society. I'm mentioning it just to give you a hint that maybe Wittgenstein is not somebody worth spending time on, and that his deconstruction of metaphysics was a Marxist-inspired attempt to install materialism as the only acceptable form of thinking. That then makes sense of what his legacy was all about. But anyway, read Cornish's book, Suspend Judgment. It's called The Jew of Linz. And it turns out Wittgenstein went to the same secondary school that the young Adolf Hitler went to. And according to Cornish, he's gone into the original sources. They hated each other. Wittgenstein was a couple of years older, and he hated Hitler, Hitler hated him. But they also kind of loved each other, because they recognised each other's intelligence. So they sort of had a boy thing going on, which never left. Wittgenstein hated Hitler for the rest of his life, and that's why he joined the communists, because he thought they would destroy Hitler, which they kind of did. And Hitler hated Wittgenstein. Well, he transmuted that into his general anti-Semitism and hating all the Jews. And so it's an absolute tragedy. If I'd have been the teacher at the school in Linz, I would have brought those two boys together and made them stay in and do detentions and write letters and solve this, because anti-Semitism is a stupid idea, and so was the revenge of going the Stalinist route, and I think I would have got them to study Plato. They were both deeply into Schopenhauer, apparently, according to Cornish, and they had a rather sort of grim view of reality. It's all about the struggle of the fittest, survival, the will, which is all Schopenhauer's rather dark and gloomy kind of worldview. But anyway, it's well worth reading. I recommend that book, The Jew of Linz by Dr. Cornish. So yes, Plato's death, gosh. Well, he cast a long shadow, and we honour his memory here. And then the other thing I want to say before we get onto our periodic table is I've been working on my 99 Names of Peace, of course, working through different languages, and I keep falling in love with these different languages. They're amazing. I did, Navajo and Thai and Catalan, and this week I've worked on Lakota, the Sioux language, and also Macedonian and Bulgarian, Slavic languages. I've travelled to Macedonia quite a few times to take part in poetry events. I love Macedonia, and it's a very rich ancient history, that region, Ohrid, where the poetry festival at Struga takes place every year. And I've been researching the whole history of the Bulgarian revolution against the Ottomans. And it was led by poets. This is really interesting. Romantic poets were revolutionaries in 19th century Balkans, fighting for freedom, as they saw it, against the Ottoman yoke. And it's really, and some of them died. There was a great, an attempted revolution, I think 1876, and the Turks unleashed some irregular troops on them and their supporters. These were not properly trained Turkish soldiers. They were like a mob with guns. And there was a terrible slaughter took place in the Balkans. And it's interesting, researching all this, I discovered that this was the thing Gladstone wrote a pamphlet about, the leader of the Liberal Party, called the Bulgarian Question and the Balkan Horrors or something. This idea that troops would slaughter, I think they killed 5,000 people in a little Bulgarian town in cold blood. That stuck in the throat of Gladstone, who, as a liberal politician, wanted what he called an ethical foreign policy for Britain. So So he said, no, Britain would intervene in these kind of horrors and stop those mass killings. And we went to the Congress of Berlin and eventually got independence for Bulgaria. What Gladstone would make of what's going on in Gaza now is just horrendous. I mean, if the Bulgarian horrors were worth kicking a fuss about, 5,000 people, we've got the Gaza horrors of 45,000 people being killed in front of us. I think Gladstone would be turning in his grave, as are the Liberal Democrats, who are his intellectual successors. And I'm a member of them for that reason, because I believe that people have the right to human rights, regardless of their race or religion and colour of their skin and so on. And that's why I support, a two-state solution for Israel-Palestine, have done for years, and set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So it's very, very sad. On All Saints' Day, there was a beautiful meeting in one of the churches in Gaza. Just being kids, kids dressing up. And I've been to the church in Bethlehem, which is in Palestine, and it's similar. I've met Palestinian Christians there. I've come to the conclusion that one of the motivations for Israel's massacre of all these people in Gaza is what I call Christophobia. The Israeli current government is the most fanatical anti-Christian government I've ever seen in Israel. It's supposed to be a land, they're the guardians of a land of Christians and Muslims and Jews living in harmony. That would be what, if Einstein had accepted the offer of being president of Israel, that's what he would have wanted. And science, of course. But it's drifted into this extremist, no, it's just our land, it's just for the Jews. And so you have to then get rid of the Christians and the Muslims. And Gaza's become a sort of killing zone for them. Well, this is Christophobia, meaning the fear of Christ. Why are they so terrified of these little Christians? They've not harmed anyone. When I went to Bethlehem, they're some of the kindest, gentlest, most beautiful people I've ever met. And almost certainly some of them are direct relatives of Jesus and his family when he was around. So why are we slaughtering them? Well, I define Christophobia, the fear of Christ, as a branch of Sophiaphobia. So Sophiaphobia is the fear of wisdom. Precisely the fear of joined-up thinking that I was talking about in my book on Being and Knowledge. People like me, we want wisdom, we love wisdom, we want joined-up knowledge, but then there are forces that rely on people being kept apart, on separation, on you can't know that, or I'll talk to you to death. The kind of totalitarian mentality of Putin and Pol Pot and Hitler is, no, that's a secret matter for the party. I'm not going to tell you, and if you ask, I'm going to kill you. That's Sophiaphobia, which is a political thing, and but it's an epistemological error. I don't think we should ever be afraid of joined-up knowledge. We shouldn't be afraid of Christ, who stood for this, because at the highest level, Sophia, wisdom, and love merge. When the heart and the mind merge in fusion, and we become enlightened, so to speak, when the mind is enlightened by the heart, and the heart is enlightened by the mind, we become proper humans. And that was what Christ was teaching. And of course the Sophiaphobes of his day executed him for it, because you weren't allowed to say this. What, love the Romans and the Jews and everyone else and the Arab types? No, kill him. So I think that's what we're up against. We're up against Christophobia and Sophiaphobia in these wars. And the same in all the others. But so I've been working on all this. And Bulgarian, strongly recommend. Look into the Bulgarian intellectual tradition. There's some fascinating joined-up thinkers there. There was a Freemason as well I came across, who was a fascinating figure, important in the history of Bulgarian Freemasonry, called Ivan Vedar, 1827 to 1898. I got interested in the history of Freemasonry studying my history degree at the University of London and doing Balkan history. I got a prize, Balkan Historian of the Year, and I that's when I went deeply into the impact of Freemasonry on the left-wing Marxist tradition and wrote some papers about it. But Ivan Vaida I'd not come across before, but I've discovered him now. He was the founder of Freemasonry in Bulgaria. An amazing guy. And there's a very moving episode in his life. He'd set up lodges. This is when Bulgaria got independence, but it wasn't complete. The Turks still had, a few forts, and they had quasi-independence. And long story short, it led to a Russian-Turkish war, because Russia decided to intervene on the side of the Bulgarians and the Slavic peoples, and they actually brought their armies and got to the outskirts of Istanbul. It's a war that's forgotten by people here in the West, but it was very important at the time, the Russo-Turkish War. And at a certain point during that war, the Russians had attacked a city which was Turkish, and somewhat brutally, people had died. And so in another part of Bulgaria, a Turkish army had surrounded a city and were going to slaughter, I think it was again about 5,000 people, innocent civilians. They were lined up in the woods and going to be shot. And this chap, Ivan Vaida, it was called Rus, I believe, this town, which is on the Danube in Bulgaria. And he went, I think he was in the town or nearby anyway. He got through to the commanding Turkish officer, who was called, I've got his name somewhere, Pasha something. And he got a safe passage through both armies to go and talk to the head Turkish commander, and he made a Masonic sign at him, like a distress sign, which only a fellow Mason would know. And because the Turkish general was also a Freemason. And he took him aside and they had a private conversation, and he said, don't slaughter these Bulgarians, it's not their fault. Don't take out revenge killings on them. It'll look bad on your CV for the future. As a fellow Mason, you should stick to the path of righteousness, and let's work out a way to save these people. And that's what they did. They managed to get the army of the Turks, who were mostly Egyptian, to actually defend them instead of killing them. Gave them a job, something to do, but instead of pointing the guns inwards, they were pointing them outwards to protect them. That's quite a famous example, and that, I think, is why Freemasonry is kind of interesting, because it transcends national borders, it transcends religious borders. And Ivan was a very interesting chap. He'd spent part of his youth in Alexandria in Egypt. He'd travelled in London, in Florence and all over the world. So I'd love to see anyone write up a history of those kinds of stories when Freemasons have actually done peace gestures and stopped massacres and killings. I'm sure there are other examples. I don't know if there's any Masonic historians out there who've studied the history of Freemasonry and peace. It would be interesting to see it done, because in the Grand Lodge in England, it's called the Temple of Peace, and it was built in Connaught Street, I think it's called. There's a museum and library which I've been in, and it's dedicated to peace. It was opened by the Duke of Connaught, and he laid the foundation stone. And that's what Freemasonry is supposed to be doing. It's got a terrible reputation as being warmongering and all that, but it's not supposed to be that at all. I'd love to see it reclaim its peace legacy. So that was Ivan Vaida, and yes, there are some amazing Bulgarians and, of course, amazing Macedonians who I've met. I met the former president of Macedonia, actually, an amazing chap, when I went to the Poetry Festival, and I was presented as one